So, now you've chosen your game. You know what kind of game you want to play. The next thing I want to talk about playing solo is you have to have a way to make a matrix. We're going to emulate a DM, and that's essentially what's going to run the game. One thing that's out on the market that I found that I've used and I really enjoy is called Mythic. And Mythic is a game emulator. I believe you can download this for free to a PDF. Me, I purchased the book um, because for me, I like to have a book. I'm a book type of person. PDFs are okay for certain things, but when it comes to my hobby, I like the book. And in here, you can either play this as a standalone RPG or you can use a game system that you like. And it utilizes what's called a fate chart, which will answer questions, determine scenarios, and it's based off of a percentage system. If you don't know what a percentage system is, it typically uses 2d10 dice. You roll them. One is your tens, one is your ones. You put those together. For instance, you roll a 9 and a 1, that'd be 91%. There you go, we got that. And it breaks it up into what I really like into scenes. Now, what do I mean by the scene? Well, there's two different RPGs styles that you could play. You could play kick in the door, kill everything, loot the treasure. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you enjoy that, it'd be very simple for you for a background story and all that. I mean, basically, hey, we're going into this dungeon to murder all these poor ass goblins and take everything they have. Nothing wrong with that. Done that a few times myself. So, but you want a more story rich environment. Let's say you want to play in the Lord of the Rings setting, and which is I like to explain it, the powder keg. So the story starts out and it just keeps building and building and building and building to pow, everything goes blah to a dull again, and it builds back up again. So in that story rich environment, you would have the scenes, and you would break up every single one of your sessions into a scene. So your first scene would start out as the story background, explaining, hey, why is your character going on this quest? Or why is your character going in this dungeon, or what have you? So, from there, it's giving you the key components that you need to start laying down the story. And then you will see over time it will come to life, and you'll have a lot of fun with it. So, you got to write down the story. Why are you doing it? You know, what is the purpose of this quest? What is your primary objective, and what are you to accomplish out of it? Then you go into your second scene, and your second scene would be actually starting the quest. Now, it could start out in a city, it could start out in a tavern, it could start out in the middle of the wilderness, whatever, use your imagination. Each scene, besides your first initial scene, which should be explaining the background story. Now, it could, if you wanted to, you could jump right into the adventure. You could jump into a dragon is attacking this town, and you know you've been pretty much elected the town hero to go and slay this thing. Hey, nothing wrong with that. I'm just using that as an example. So, or maybe you're on a secret quest. Maybe you're on a secret quest to go and retrieve an artifact so it doesn't get into the hands of some evil mages that could spell doom. And when that scene, obviously, the first scene would start out in secrecy with the person that you're speaking with, and so on and so forth, to build the story. Now, with that scene, that's going to open it up, leading into the second scene, into the third scene, into the fourth scene. And you're going, I know this. Where are we going with all this? So, with each scene, what I like to do when I play it is you're going to consider your encounters and you're going to consider monsters. And one of the game systems that I really like for this that I noticed the newer systems don't utilize, and I don't play every single RPG out there, so some of them may still, but though I know the ones I play don't, is the original basic D&D in their monster manuals would always have number appearing, and you'd roll the dice and it would tell you from 1 to 100 or 1,000 or what have you. And this is very cool because you can take this number of encounters and you know you have this many encounters, and you could break it up across many different scenes, one scene, however you want to do it. Now, and it works very well. But what I will typically do is for each scene is get 4 or 5 encounters. Now, typically with this, when I'm thinking of the background story and all that, I already know in my mind the terrain in the game, the environment that my character is going to be traversing and adventuring in. So from there, I can stock my scenarios as I see fit with the amount of creatures and a percentage that the encounter could occur. What I find that this works really well for me, and it keeps a certain amount of randomness going because you never know. You could encounter goblins, you can encounter orcs, you can encounter dragons, you could what have you. And the point I'm getting at here is there's a lot of randomness there, so you don't know, and it keeps everything going. So that's the encounter part. What about the story part? Well, obviously, when it comes to role playing, if you tried role playing by yourself, I doubt that would go over very well. People might think you're pretty nuts, you know. Well, we are. But anyway, so in your scenes, this is where you're going to want to jot this down for your notes to reflect back on later on. NPCs you have met, encounters you might have met, maybe you found a clue to an artifact, or maybe you ran across the map to a hidden dungeon. Now you're on your way to this quest, but hey, on the way back, we'll stop and check it out. So you catalog those. Now, if you didn't encounter all the encounters in that scene, they're still there because you're going to move on to a different scene. So I'm just going to use this as an example. You were given your quest in a small little village. From the village, you went through the ancient forest. From the ancient forest, you went to an abandoned keep to an underground hidden dungeon beneath. But you didn't encounter everything in them scenes. Now, as you go back to get back to that village to report to them for whatever your game reason is, there's a good possibility you may hit the encounters on the way back. You don't know. And this is where the role comes into role-playing game. Now, I don't mean R-O-L-E, R-O-L-L, role. So what I like to do, me personally, I write up the scene, I roll my 2 10-siders, and I come up with a percentage. A percentage that there's a possibility, or I should say, not a possibility, but a percentage that there will be an encounter. And with factoring in time and movement, I normally roll a 1d4, and which will represent hours that it takes the characters to be able to travel through that certain area of the map. And then the percentage die are rolled. Now, when I say encounter, it doesn't necessarily mean all monsters. They could encounter a monster, they could encounter traps, or they can encounter environmental hazards. And those are all things when you play a solo RPG that you have to think of ahead of time and you put in. One thing I suggest when you do this is you get a loose leaf and some notebook paper, and you sit down and you start building matrix tables and you write them down. And especially with environmental data, traps, so on and so forth. Now, if you wanted to have more randomness instead of just dice, one thing that I use with some of my earlier systems and my notes that I have that I still use now is I will get a basic set of cards. And yeah, these are old. This is actually a basic set of cards. And all 52 are still there. And you get 4 different suits with obviously 10 cards each suit. And then, of course, you got your actual suit card: King, Queen, Jack, Joker, so on. And I will jot in them loose leaves. This will happen with this particular card when it's pulled, which gives it a lot of randomness. You shuffle them up, you put them down, you don't know what's going to happen. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's not right because, you know, you could screw yourself. You characters could get killed. Well, that's very true, but that's all part of fantasy role-playing game. The thing I like about it is it puts randomness in it, and the DM's going to do the same thing to you. DM's going to throw curveballs at you. So when it comes to building the story, you got to decide what do you want to do? Kick the door in, or do you want a story-rich environment? From there, you have to set up your adventure, beginning, middle, end, just like a story, and your travels. Allot your encounters that you could possibly encounter, traps, environmental hazards, so on and so forth through there to your destination point. And then from there, if you're going to return to the beginning or if you're going to move on from there. And you're going to find that the story moves pretty well. And how I like to do it is each gaming session I do one scene. And that typically takes me a couple hours to get through that. And as I keep gaming, I'll go through another scene to the next scene, to the next scene, to the next scene. And it helps very greatly. So, from here, the next thing we have to move on to we'll talk about some different game systems, combat system, and how when you play solo, you should kind of, things you may want to consider, not things, I don't want to say things you should do because you shouldn't do anything you want to do, but suggestions for you to try. And then moving on from there, we're going to get into terrain.